Welcome to American Intelligence Media. I am your host, Douglas Gabriel, aka Thomas Paine. Today I'm having a wonderful discussion with our good friend, John Barnwell. How are you today, John?
I'm doing great, actually.
I'm thrilled because you've given us the topic of trumping the deep state. I know some people have actually written books called Killing the Deep State, and other people have noticed that the word deep state has come into the mainstream media and people try to define it. Now it's this, again, generic term which isn't very specific. And when we talk about the deep state and we talk about Trump, it's kind of like, is this globalism versus nationalism, or is this the old guard? I mean, how do these things work, John? How is it that the people hate Trump so much? What has he come and disrupted? What are these old streams of power that he has disrupted? And do you think he's going to be able to literally trump the deep state during his administration?
Well, I think that he's definitely our best chance. And first, I guess we should clarify, because people throw around the word deep state, and as soon as they can come up with a phrase or a meme or something, all the thinking stops, because it's just that thing that's like, oh, okay, I know what that is. And you tell somebody that, and they don't really know what you're talking about, but they don't want to seem stupid. And basically the way I look at it, and the way a lot of people within what you might call the intelligence community, you'd say that the deep state has to do with the corporate aspect of it, and the think tanks and all the kind of things that swirl around the various foundations and all of that. The secret government would be a more proper way to describe governmental organizations like the Senior Executive Service, the SES, for example, which is, basically people that are serving the corporate interests of the deep state. And as far as Donald Trump is concerned, President Trump, he's a very interesting individual who was tapped on the shoulder quite some time ago and told by Richard Nixon himself. The letter is available, and you can view it online, where Nixon tells him that Pat thought that Trump one day would be president, which is pretty interesting. In recent time, the relationship with Richard Nixon and Donald Trump has been exposed or revealed far more completely, and now we know that actually they had become quite good friends. And Richard Nixon moved, he was in New York, and there's pictures of them at various events together, and they, I'm sure, had a lot of lively exchanges, seeing as how Trump's mentor was so involved with Richard Nixon when Nixon was involved in the McCarthy era hearings. And that would have been Roy Cohn, the attorney. He was Donald Trump's mentor when Donald came to develop in New York City. He met Roy Cohn, and Roy Cohn was the person who showed him kind of the ropes through the people of power in New York and all of that. And so that's one level of interest, especially when you consider that Richard Nixon was the vice president of Eisenhower. And Eisenhower is a very interesting individual, because he was such a great servant to this country, one of the greatest of the Republican presidents. In fact, we have a highway system because of him. But it was laid down for the idea that we would have defensive capabilities because of the superhighway system that was developed under him. But beyond that, you also have the development of what you would call the secret government coming really into a more developed manifestation. Starting from 1947, you have Truman laying down the laws. They don't come to mind right now, the specific laws. I don't feel like looking them up. Anybody can look it up. But the CIA was founded, but there was also an interesting group that shows us yet another connection relating to Donald Trump. And that's the group that's called, in common parlance, MJ-12. And or Majestic 12, and that was a what you might call it's called in intelligence circles an unacknowledged secret access project, a USAP, and an unacknowledged secret access project is just what it says. It's a secret access project. There is secret access projects. That's a classification. The deeper classification is the unacknowledged. That's if somebody asks about it, you say it doesn't exist. But documents surfaced. There was a document that came out regarding MJ-12. It brought a lot of criticism. But since that's come out, there's been quite a bit more information revealed regarding the reality of MJ-12. And MJ-12, by the way, is tied into the whole idea of the technology that was being developed as a result of the UFO crashes in the late 40s. And there was also a UFO crash early in the 40s. There were programs in existence actually before that time, too, through the Department of Navy, but we won't get into that. There's so many rabbit holes we could duck down, but I think that that's one of them that I would like to explore today.
Well, do you think that Trump is going to be able to win against the intelligence community, seeing that James Clapper, the lying machine, is now on CNN, the very place that he illegally leaked the information about the dossier, or that Brennan is on another channel, or that you see Comey on the third channel, or they're all over the place. These the intelligence people that he had previously had association with, who are basically been going after him to disrupt his election, disrupt his presidency, in fact. Do you think he's going to be able to defeat these intelligence communities?
Yeah, I think that basically what you see there is there's certain rogue elements within the intelligence community that's represented by Clapper and Brennan. And if you dig into the CIA, it developed out of the OSS that was started by Wild Bill Donovan, as he was called. And he was a highly, highly decorated officer, and he was picked to be the head of the OSS, which was a organization that was created in liaison with William Stevenson, who was a code name Intrepid. He wrote a book, Intrepid, and he was a Canadian who really was not confident with the result of World War I, and so he, with his own funding, he owned the Canadian Broadcast Company, and he owned a lot of various industrial companies, and he was extremely successful, and he used his funds to develop an intelligence organization, and then he tapped the Brits on the shoulder and said, you know, let's get this going here. And it was him who coordinated with Wild Bill Donovan, and he had a training camp for the OSS, and later CIA, on the north shore of Lake Erie. And as a result of that activity, there was the the development of the CIA. But the CIA originally was intended to be information gathering, like NSA. They weren't supposed to be operatives, your knocks, your guys that are boots on the ground, with weapons and all of that. That wasn't really supposed to be what was going on with the CIA, but it started to develop its own agenda once it moved out of military hands, and it started developing under Allen Dulles. And Allen Dulles was very problematic, and he was removed from the head of the CIA. And now we know from the JFK documents that have been coming out that he is the figure behind the Kennedy assassination. He's not by himself, of course, but he's a central figure in that, and also tied into Robert Kennedy's assassination, and so there's this whole problematic element of corporatism that infested our intelligence community. Now, how this plays into Donald Trump, President Trump, it's important to understand that his uncle was Professor John Trump, Dr. Trump. And Dr. Trump was the individual picked by Vannevar Bush. Now, Dr. Vannevar Bush was the head of MJ-12. He was he was one of the leading figures in the Manhattan Project regarding the development of the atom bomb. And he was really one of the leading scientists at the time. Now, we know for sure, as a result of the papers of Wilbert Smith, who was a scientist from Canada. He was a Canadian radio engineer, and he's highly revered. And during the 50s, he was a high level within the Canadian government regarding UFO technology research and all of that. And we know from his correspondence that Vannevar Bush was the head of the U.S. Research and Development Board and the MJ-12 group. So we know that. But how does that directly relate with Trump? Well, Vannevar Bush, the head of this whole project regarding technology development from the UFOs, that was put into play by Colonel Philip Corso and was revealed in his book The Day After Roswell. And it was Vannevar Bush that picked President Trump's uncle, John Trump, to be the person that went and retrieved the records at the death of Nikola Tesla. And that's a really interesting point. Now, John Trump was one of the pioneers with Van de Graaff in the development of high-energy X-ray technology that's being used in cancer research and all manner of things. But he was one of the leading technologists in the country and the protege of Vannevar Bush, who was the head of MJ-12. Now, if you recall, it wasn't too long ago that Donald Trump, in a public speech, made the announcement about how we were going to reactivate our space programs, and that we were going to be seeing amazing technologies, as he called it, to be revealed to the public. And that's part of the problem.
Well, of course, it's part of the problem because the corporations, they don't like things to move forward without them being part of it so that they get their piece of the pie. So we know that there's tremendous innovation that isn't coming into America. We know that they're stealing patents under the auspices of national security issues, and then they weaponize these patents. We've seen this happen with leader technologies, inventions with scalability of social networking. We've seen this happen again and again, also with weapons, quite literally. So how is it that we can counteract these things, John? What is it that we can do? How is it that we can help Trump so that he can put these things into play, because there's so much corporate resistance, so much, for instance, Serco, which is basically a British-based company, screens every single patent that comes through the U.S. Patent Office. They get basically their first choice. So we know that the Queen is involved in Lockheed Martin. She's involved in all these things. The Crown of England is deeply involved. So Trump is disturbing all these things, and he surely has insight, because we have insight. We've done report after report on free energy devices that you can buy right now. Can't buy them in America, but you can buy them in other countries, and they do work. And these technologies are going on everywhere, including thorium, which can replace nuclear reactors, uranium nuclear reactors. So how is it that he can get the chance to get through this corporate resistance? We've seen him do it with the UN, politically, with climate change, with North Korea, with war, the whole consideration of war in Afghanistan, Iraq, Israel, Syria, and North Korea, all that. But how does he get through and break through the corporate resistance to allowing these kind of new technologies to come forward?
Well, I think probably the first thing that has to be done, and some of it has been done, because when he first came into the White House, it was noticed by a lot of people that there were a great many governmental positions, in excess of 20,000 of them, jobs that he didn't fill, and nobody noticed anything. You know, it's kind of funny when you can, like, eliminate 20,000 positions in government, and nobody even notices anything happen. Yep. You know, and so that's a key thing. I think really what we've been pushing out here with American Intelligence Media and Americans for Innovation, the strategy of the Senior Executive Service. I keep wanting to call it secret, because it was the secret for so long until we revealed it. But the Senior Executive Service has to be, they have to pull the plug on that. Now, I know that a lot of members of the Senior Executive Service have, since the furor that we've raised, and others, Field McConnell and David Hawkins, we owe to them the tap on the shoulder regarding the reality of the Senior Executive Service. But once we jumped on and Michael McKibben and his marvelous researchers over at Americans for Innovation started revealing the plum books and revealing how many people are involved in this, what you would call secret government. This is the secret government. The deep state would be the corporate interests. And that this secret government is in a process of providing a ready avenue for no big contracts to transnational corporations, primarily Serco and other companies like Lockheed Martin, that are so intimately tied into the Crown in the UK. Now, I had a conversation years ago with Max Fisher, the wealthy American who turned down cabinet posts 5 times and was very good friends with Richard Nixon. And it was back when the Japanese were becoming so successful, and they started buying up all kinds of things in the United States. And I asked Max about that. I was at his house, and I asked him, I said, aren't you concerned about that? He says, oh, well, no, it frees up our money for other things. Yeah, but, you know, certain things we don't allow them to invest in. I said, oh, you mean like military industrial complex? And he said, yes, exactly. And see, that is the barrier that's been crossed here, because we have been allowing, most especially since like Carter, specifically more so after 9/11, allowing transnational corporations to hold major holdings within our sensitive industries that they're not necessarily serving our national interests. Now, it could be it could be stopped with an executive order. The idea that certain transnational corporations like Serco are providing services, like Serco runs our patent office and trademarks. They run they run records departments at military bases. They run so many aspects of our government that they're everywhere. They're all over the place. They're like the biggest company, biggest corporation you've never heard of, and they're a British company, and they are directly a crown company, and they're run by one of the grandsons of Winston Churchill, and whose brother was equerry to Prince Charles. And so that's really a questionable situation when you have somebody who's not an American in charge of such sensitive things like our visa centers. They run our visa centers. You know, the visas that were provided for the Saudi Arabians, primarily they were Saudi Arabians who were involved in the 9/11 thing. Now, granted, they didn't fly the planes in, but they were a part of the whole strategy. They got their visas through this visa system that is presided over by Serco. And in fact, it was through Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, and at the time, Brennan was station chief in Saudi Arabia.
You know, John, you probably have a better insight than most about the Brits and how these systems came into America. So in the downline from the U.S. aid and from OPIC, you have a company called Crown Agents USA. Basically, they are exactly that. They are Crown Agents, and they state on their website they've been active since 1711, and they are literally the Crown, the British Crown's agents in America. And they receive huge amounts of money through humanitarian concerns where we're giving it out under the auspices of aid. They get incredible insider trading information. They get incredible insider cronyism corporate deals for loans through the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, OPIC. They get just huge amounts of money. But the question, and let's say also through uranium, through Urenco, a company owned by the Queen and Holland, and two German companies connected to the German State Department. So how is it that they own BP and Shell Oil and they control the majority of gas stations in America? How is it that they drill for oil in America when we have plenty of Standard Oil was started here? Why are we paying the British? Why do the British have the contracts for, Serco had the contract for Obamacare. CGI had a contract, a Canadian company, and remember, 53 Commonwealth nations all answer to the Queen and the Crown. CGI got $2 billion to do nothing more than a website for the Obamacare site. And then later, the entire management of it was given over to Serco. As you pointed out, Serco's managing so much stuff, sensitive in the military, corporation, it doesn't matter. Wherever there's a contract where big money flows, somehow the Crown agents get in there and they get their piece to the pie. And what we have found is that the golden share is the trick to all of this. We found through Leader Technologies research that the golden share is a mysterious thing that gives the Queen some veto power and some control over all these corporations that she is somehow involved in. So it is a very, very thick web of deceit that we get into when we talk about the British Crown in relationship to the Bank of England, in relationship to the City of London, and the way that that mimics the Vatican City and the Vatican Bank. But also, it was then infused with the brilliant and still burning supernova in our economic terrorist sky of the Dutch and British East India companies. These corporations that became more powerful than nations. Now we have Lockheed, which not only controls, they just merged, Lockheed's intelligence department just merged with Leidos. Leidos used to be SAIC. This is the group it's a company that is private, but they work with the CIA as their DARPA, as their Department of Research and Development for the CIA, but they're private. And so Leidos gets nothing but military contracts, and they're one of the largest corporations in intelligence in the world. Now they've merged with Lockheed's intelligence department, which we've been harping on for some time. That makes Lockheed in charge of British nuclear weapons, British nuclear fuel, uranium and uranium disbursements throughout the world, the biggest planes in the world, the biggest spy ships in the world, all by Lockheed. Now the biggest intelligence agency in the world. And no one is stopping it. Comey worked for them, got them out of, the fact that they stole trillions of dollars from the Pentagon. Comey got them off of that. Then he went to HSBC, got them off of billion-dollar SEC charges. So we see that these companies are so powerful, and now Lockheed is practically a nation unto itself. If you were to say, I'd call it the Lockheed Martin East India Company, because they are imperialists of the worst type. They're corporatists of the worst type. They are not Americans. They do not, in any sense of the word, support America, and they have one of the largest intelligence contracts with the intelligence community out there in the corporate world. So what we need to do is simply take down some of these Crown agents. We need to stop funneling money to the Crown in Britain. We need to stop allowing Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, and all these other companies, which you're very, very aware of. We need to stop allowing them to have no-bid contracts and contracts that they don't fulfill and they rip off the Pentagon for continuously. $9.5 trillion missing in these contracts. No one even knows where it went. So can we stop these things, John? Can Trump actually stop this type of incursion through the SES, through what you'd call a bureaucratic system of the status quo that makes sure that the same old people get the money? Can we stop the intelligence takeover of America?
Well, if you look at the history of President Trump's relationship with Britain, it's really quite interesting because they denied him. Initially they were denying that he could come to the UK, and you look and like the rogue elements of MI6 providing information for the so-called Trump dossier. Every time it seems like you turn around and you look, and there's somebody British standing behind it. It really pains me because I really love the British people, and I've spent a lot of time studying British history, but really when you get into it, you see that the present Queen and the House of Windsor, there's something that was transported in on the behest of the livery. What the livery are is the professional organizations that are centered in the City of London. The City of London itself is a corporate entity unto itself, as is the Vatican, as is Washington, D.C., which also includes other possessions like Guam and Puerto Rico and so on and so forth. But technically, Washington, D.C. is its own entity. Now, that is problematic, and I think we'd have to do a whole another thing to get into that part of it, because really the defense of the Republic is dependent upon American people waking up to decentralization. The New World Order that was proclaimed by President Bush, Herbert Walker Bush, that is the problem. And President Trump has said so many times, Americanism, not globalism. Now, this isn't any kind of weird, obsessive nationalism, as some might characterize it. It's not anything unkind to other peoples. It's meant to be a clarification of intent and purpose. And we're a constitutional republic. But yet, how many years have you heard that we're sending troops overseas to further the spread of democracy? Well, we're not a democracy. We're a constitutional republic that uses a democratic process by which we elect officials. So if were you to go in that straight route towards democracy, basically what you end up is mob rule. It's well known that just democracy doesn't work, just as it's well known that socialism doesn't work, even though the socialists say, well, it hasn't worked yet because it won't work until we have socialism over the whole world, and which is, of course, absurd, because human nature is such that it leads itself to failure at every turn. And you just look at Cuba, or if you look at what happened in the Soviet Union, or Venezuela, with the absolute failure of that system, you can see that that doesn't work. So that the best thing that we could hope for is for Donald Trump, President Trump, to reassert constitutional government in Washington. It's up to the American people to start to get active within their local communities to reassert. There's a lot that can be done through what's called nullification, because really the powers rest with the state. The federal government doesn't have power. The federal government doesn't have rights. Citizens have rights. States have powers. And the purpose of the federal government is just to be an overarching organizational entity that allows us to function as a nation and to be able to provide currency and to be able to handle commerce, as far as being able to have ports and directing tariffs and so on and so forth. But this huge monster that has been created, it's just this huge Frankenstein, bureaucratic Frankenstein, that's nowhere implied. As Jerome Corsi, someone who I frequently agree with and frequently disagree with, said, there's nothing in the Constitution that provides for bureaucracy.
But when you have a big system, an institution as old as the Vatican, thousands of years old, or the British government, corruption seeps in. And so when I'm thinking about intelligence and whether Trump can actually trump the secret government, I like the way you call it, secret government, I think back to when the Rothschilds decided to buy Reuters, the newspaper agency or the news agency, because they found out that through yellow journalism, by making up lies, that the best intelligence was through these type of media systems. And so Reuters Thompson now, is one of the major news sources in the world, and the second is the Associated Press, which at one point Rothschild's family owned that also. It's now a cooperative. But even when you look at who owns the media that are part of that cooperative, it goes back to the same group of shareholders that we find also in the central banks and the U.S. Federal Reserve, in the major banks and the major industrial companies, the Fortune 500. They're all an interwoven net of the same people. These are, in its initial stage, these were bankers and brokers and investors. And then they became the robber barons. And so we have to remember that Rothschild and its Reuters, Thompson, and AP really hasn't changed at all. If you're going to be a banker and you're going to give out money for war on both sides of the war, and then later on mop it up and fleece the country that you gave the money to, and then establish some type of central bank that loans money out, fiat currency, based upon debt that you can never pay. It's the standard routine being used starting back with really this first central bank, which was the Vatican Bank, and then the Bank of England, and the Dutch bankers and the German bankers, and of course the bankers in Venice were really big into this during the time of the Crusades, because they found out that if you give money to both sides, then no matter what, you always win. And so we see this, and the intelligence agencies have now basically taken complete control of the mainstream media in America, and the resistance is the alternative media, citizen journalists like ourselves. We do what we can, and we lay the seeds of consciousness. The question is, are we going to reach a critical mass of consciousness that will be able to counteract and basically reconstitute or destroy and then reconstitute the mainstream media, which is essentially nothing more than a propaganda machine for the vested interests? Do you think we'll be able to actually do that through the humble work that we're doing?
Well, I think it's happening, actually. I think that more people now are turning to alternative news sources than they are to the major media. The major media, the corporate media, is collapsing. The level of trust, I mean, geez, I mean, a year ago, what they did a survey, and what the level of trust was, what I think, somewhere between 6 and 16% of the major media. So people don't take them seriously anymore, and you can see that they're all working off the same scripted talking points, and it's become absurd. So they're going through their death throes, and that's when things can get kind of dicey, because these people become desperate. And you bring up the Rothschilds. See, the thing that people need to understand is that they are warlords. Okay, they have been making money off of providing financing for war. I mean, you can go back, for example, they financed Napoleon. Okay, but they also financed the British. Now, not many people realize this, but the bankers felt that Napoleon was getting too big for his britches, and so they pulled his funding and they gave it to Wellington, and that's when Napoleon was defeated at Waterloo. And so it's like the old game of no matter who loses, we win. And see, that brings up the concept of the great game. And the great game is the name of a British Empire strategy that they've used effectively for so long. It's based on the principle of that. It's a Venetian principle initially, because see, in Venice, they were just a small city-state, but they had enormous financial power, and they had an enormous fleet, which they would rent out, so to speak, to the various nations, and they helped transport troops to the Crusades, for example. But if they had something that they wanted to accomplish, what they would do, rather than go in and start a war with somebody, they would go and agitate somebody who was an opponent of the person that they wanted to cause trouble for. And that's the great game. It's my enemy's enemy is my friend. And so the British used that to great effect in China, developing the British Empire. They used it to great effect in India, and it was used in North America against the American Indians, where getting the various tribes to fight against each other, that would just reduce the number of people that we had to fight against. So that's a very, very old strategy, and it's the one that they're using right now. They're really trying to create this whole idea that there's all these various groups that are in conflict, you know, and trying to stir up this so-called racial opposition, where things were going along fine. We'd made such tremendous progress racially that all of a sudden movements that are funded by protege of the Rothschilds, like George Soros, who was directly mentored by one of the Rothschilds, and he starts financing groups like Black Lives Matter and so on and so forth. So first of all, what we have to do is we have to deal with George Soros. We also have to deal with, and eventually I think in President Trump's second term, he can do this. He can pull off getting us out from under the Federal Reserve. That's a huge, huge thing. There's other things that can be wound down, like the Bank of International Settlements, which was founded to deal with finances after the end of World War II. You know, it's also complicated because it's so interwoven, and I mean, there's a whole cascade of scenarios that could be painted into this picture because it's been developing for so long. There's so many levels of complication that it kind of boggles the mind in coming to terms with it. But I think that Donald Trump is really, he's a tremendously brilliant individual. Is he perfect? By no means. Does he always do the right things? No, I don't know anybody that does, but he's got more right than anybody I've seen in my lifetime. But getting back to some of the things that I wanted to present here is to your whole issue of the deep state and companies like Lockheed Martin, for example. Many people don't realize, but the Lockheed Martin is actually the largest private intelligence company in the United States and in the world, actually. But yet they're not held by American interests. That there's that golden share attribution. And Michael McKibben, on your wonderful podcast on that the other day, was saying, I don't understand this. It's hard to understand because you look and there's this kind of mutual exchange of authority between Lockheed Martin and the Crown. Now, by having the Queen holding the golden share, basically what that says is nobody in Britain can look into it because you can't look into the Queen's finances. But in the same token, there's a certain authority held back by Lockheed Martin itself. So that keeps them out of the purview of governmental authorities, both in the U.S. and in the U.K. And so it's just beneath layers of complicated lawyer activity and corporate law, and they're a private company. You know, they don't have to reveal certain things, and so, but yet they're working on sensitive government projects. But yet they're UK held. You know, if you look at the layers and layers and layers of complication, it boggles the mind trying to understand how it's going to be approached. But I think that President Trump is on the right path. I think that it'll take 2 terms for him to make significant progress, and I think that it's really key if he could eliminate the Federal Reserve in his second term. He couldn't do it in his first, and if he can start to reclaim so much turf that's been handed over to private companies, private intelligence, and so on and so forth. That's the way it was initially meant to be. The initial head of CIA was Wild Bill Donovan. He's military. These people, They're under oath. Now we see our government. There's so many people in our government, for example, that are members of the Knights of Malta. Now, a lot of people go, well, what's that? It's just like some club. Well, no, actually, the Knights of Malta, you take an oath of allegiance to the Vatican and to the Pope. And also, a membership in Knights of Malta, that's a diplomatic passport. That qualifies you for a diplomatic passport. You can pass through airports. There's a lot of privileges that go along with a diplomatic passport, including the all sorts of insider trading that's available, and to be able to run your funding secretly through the Vatican Bank, so that it's nobody can look at it, because the Vatican is a sovereign entity and nobody can audit the Vatican Bank. Then you start to get a handle on that, and the way the banking system is run through various offshore operations that are centered in the city of London. And so you have your, what 114 or so liveries within the city of London. The city of London has its own mayor, and I'm saying City of London proper. That's the 1 square mile financial district in the center of London that's separate from the City of London that has their recently elected a Muslim mayor. The City of London proper is City of London, UK, is this district that's the district of the livery, and they have their own mayor, and they have their own rules, and they're directly licensed beneath the Crown to conduct their activities. The leading group within that would be the Worshipful Company of Mercers. And that has to do with trade, and that's the organization that extends back. It goes way back, in medieval times. But the significant part that we're concerned with here in the U.S. is that East India Trading Company that was so big in the opium trade, and having to do with the establishment of the British Empire in its largest extent under Queen Victoria. But, again, there's so many levels of complication here, and it's how could we extract ourselves from this centralized bureaucracy, because that's the key. And if you're wondering what the issue is, it's decentralization and sovereignty.
Absolutely. And as you've pointed out so many times in conversations, the secret government we have here in America is very much taken from the British system, which is a secret government, because in all those liveries, they're run by committees, and no one is allowed to know who's on the committees except for the Crown. And so it's a complete secret system, and they have complete autonomy and complete monopoly in their area, and autonomy to act, except that the Queen has still the power to veto anything that happens. People don't understand that the Crown still rules the UK, and it's a secret system, and it's not a conspiracy. These are the laws. And this conspiracy that, there's a deep state in America, it's not a conspiracy. We've named who they are. We've named the people. The Senior Executive Service has many names, and we're finding out that, a special government employee, like we just found out about Daniel Richmond, Comey, the guy who we leaked to, that was a professional paid leaker. Special government employee. The FBI has the ability to go in and appoint anybody they want, hire them, don't hire them, pay them, don't pay them, use them as an asset, manipulate them, make them plea offerings, make them plea deals, exonerate them from crimes, whatever they want. So it's a secret thing that's going on, and we can now see that in everything that's coming out in Washington, D.C. And I think, as you've pointed out so many times, it comes from the British government, and then they learned it, of course, from the Vatican. My big question, John, do you think that Trump is going to be able to use the art of the deal? Recently, when he announced that his campaign manager was going to be Brad Pascal, well, that's who he used with Cambridge Analytica last year to do some analysis. And then what happened? Well, let's think about this for a second. Was he playing this game you're talking about? I'd call it a counterintelligence, where he's actually doing an art of the deal. We find out that, you know, dude Zuckerberg, Mark Zuckerberg, wants to come out and say, oh yeah, $100,000 spent by the Russians. And then we have Mueller come out and say, oh, the IRA, this Internet Research Agency, that news was 3 years old, Mr. Mueller. They don't exist there now. None of those people do that anymore. And yet we believed it because it came out in the news as a preparation. That was his response to, of course, what Zuckerberg did. Zuckerberg came out and said, oh, yeah, I looked through all the books, and I found these 470 entries where Russians paid for ads, which, you know, really did throw the election. No. The money that was spent for those ads was so minuscule, it doesn't count. And then they, in the recent congressional report from the intelligence, Devin Nunes Intelligence Committee, the Select Intelligence Committee for Congress, has turned in their report. And their final report says, ooh, yes, the Russians really influenced the election through RT. I watched the news. I didn't even know RT existed until all this came down, Russia Today. And there had been a previous study done, and then it was resurrected in 2016, given as a joint report from the intelligence community, stating that, yes, Russia Today, that's why the election was thrown. That's how Trump won. So what we're seeing here is Trump said, hey, look over here. I'm going to make my campaign official for running for 2020. I'm appointing Brad, and he secretly knew they were going to rip Brad apart. Who do they think leaked the information that Brad had taken this 270,000 individuals from an analysis done by another British company, and then they say it's 50 million. Well, what happened? Zuckerberg had to go before the Congress. He had to admit that he surveils everyone. He had to admit that anyone can buy your profile at any time for $3.54, and that this happens nonstop. He's not going to stop it. You signed a user agreement. Tough luck. And in the end, his stock goes down, then it goes up. Because really, are Americans paying any attention? Well, what happened was Trump played them. Trump played the Mueller. He knew what was coming, and he played them. Brad came out on purpose, in my opinion, to show that as soon as they pile up on Trump, we get what we call here the Trump effect. And it bounces back to the person who threw it at him with the same force. And it usually hits him dead square in the forehead. So Zuckerberg came out and read the notes that he was told to read, though he didn't have any idea what he was reading, what he was saying, and he had nothing to do with it. And what do we really find out? We find out that all of them, every one of the Silicon Valley cardboard cutout boy kings, are surveilling you and selling it. Not only selling it, but selling it to our own government, to the CIA, to the NSA, to the FBI. It's now just become revealed again and again. Trump tweets something about monopolies, and look what happens to these companies. They lose billions of dollars in a day. So what is Trump doing? I believe he's working against the intelligence community because he asked Dan Coates about 40 days ago to come up with a plan to make sure immediately that all Americans are no longer surveilled. I believe Trump is playing them, and that the reason that we're seeing Jeff Bezos and Amazon falter, the reason we're seeing Facebook falter, the reason that Eric Schmidt has disappeared, got off the board of Alphabet, the mother company of Google, and is now basically hiding, and Peter Thiel sold his part of Facebook and his part of his company, and they're all moving around. Why? Because Trump is going after the people who surveilled him. He's going to stop surveillance of America, in my opinion, and he's going to live up to what he told us he was going to do and what he gave as a commission to Dan Coates, the head, who is the office of the Director of National Intelligence. He's the head of that, and he's in charge of the entire intelligence community. In my opinion, he's taking down the mainstream media through a back door of collapsing their system right in front of them. And he's doing it almost single-handedly. And I believe that he will be successful in the long run. Well,
And we can only hope, because again, I want to stress, if you go back, let's do a little thumbnail history sketch from 30,000 feet. So you have at one time we had the Department of War, and basically what that was the military aspect of our government with the Army and the Navy, and the Army had the Army Air Force, right? Well, that whole system was reorganized by James Forrestal, and he was the last cabinet-level United States Secretary of Navy and the first United States Secretary of Defense. And he was a very, very significant figure. And in organizing the Department of Defense, he was amongst the people that felt that the programs that were being developed secretly in the military and most enthusiastically within the Navy, these programs relative to what happened at the end of the war regarding the technology that arose after Roswell. That would include transistor technology. That also includes things like carbon fiber, and there's quite a few developments, anti-gravity technology, so on and so forth. But in any event, what people don't realize is that James Forrestal was very, very good friends with John Kennedy. John Kennedy was in the Navy. People know that because PT 109 and that whole story. What people don't generally know, and a lot of this is being revealed by Daniel List over a dark journalist on YouTube. But the position of John Kennedy was very significant. He traveled toward the end of the war to Berlin with James Forrestal, the founder of the Defense Department, and he traveled to Berlin with him, and he was very much in the know regarding a great deal of what our country had started to develop within the undisclosed secret access projects, as they came to be called. And Kennedy was amongst the people that believed that these things should be brought forward for the benefit of the American people. And it's now become clear that the actions of Kennedy towards this, and also he wanted to work with the Russians, because at that time it was felt it was necessary to protect the planet, and he had asked if they would work with us to develop space programs. That's what he wanted to do, was share the technology with the Russians. That's what led to his death. That was the issue. As far as Marilyn Monroe, he had shared some of these things with her. It's now known from the fact that she was being wiretapped by the FBI, and she had stopped getting return phone calls from John Kennedy and from Bobby Kennedy, and she was threatening to go to the press with the information that she had regarding UFOs and a particular alien being that was actually being kept at a military base. Then you fast forward a bit to Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was planning on disclosing the technology advancements that were available through these undisclosed secret access programs. That was when Watergate happened. That's why they took out Nixon. They didn't want him revealing these secret projects. Now, these secret projects that are being held by companies like Lockheed Martin and by Boeing and all these different corporate interests that are not even on the radar. as far as their land holdings don't show up in the computer databases that Catherine Austin Fitts was consulting. When she contacted them to get information regarding their finances so she could work out the finances when she was a deputy director of HUD, Housing and Urban Development, they told her they couldn't give her the information. She asked to speak to somebody higher up, and they hung up on her. So that's what they think. That's the kind of hubris that we're up against. And so it becomes much clearer when you realize that actually the people that you were talking to were probably somebody at a company held by the Crown.
And or an SES member.
Yes.
There's no doubt about that, because that's where everything gets slowed down, slow walked, and just, turned into dust. So, John, what we're seeing here, and I think what you're saying is that these technologies that are available, Trump knows about them. He's a businessman. It's very possible that when he's in his second term that he's going to be able to truly turn around our economy in the biggest way and basically reconstruct it, not only through getting rid of the Federal Reserve and through lots of other restructurings, through trade deals and so on and so forth, but by bringing out some new technologies. Now, we have never really discussed these type of technologies before in conversation, so I appreciate the fact that you're putting it in a historical perspective so that people can go back and look at these things and check them out themselves, not only just believe, not just simply believe in some type of theory that someone has or somebody's particular beliefs or whatever, but we're talking about historical facts that have led to the demise of presidents. And so when you're saying that the type of information that Trump has become aware of through his own family members, as well as through his own experience, and now that he's the president, this could be the dawning of a new day for free energy in America. So we want to thank you for being with us today, John. Our time is up, but we're going to come back and discuss some of these topics that you mentioned here that we need to pick up and carry them forward. And as always, we really appreciate your contribution to what we're doing here at Aim for Truth. As I
respect the work of you and Betsy and Michael McKibben and everybody, this has really been an honor to be associated with such talented and patriotic Americans.
Well, you're one of us, and we couldn't do it without you. So thank you again. We'll speak again soon.